The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in his bones, a permanent resident in the hollowed-out spaces of his heart. Jack Riley watched from the greasy window of his workshop as the Montana sky bled from bruised purple into an oppressive, unending white. The blizzard wasn't just a storm, it was an entity, a living, breathing monster of wind and ice that clawed at the tin roof and screamed through the cracks in the walls. It was a mirror to the blizzard that had raged inside him for 2 years. Ever since the state trooper had knocked on this very door, his hat in his hands and his face a mask of practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Riley. There was black ice." They didn't suffer. Lies. Everyone suffered. He suffered every morning when he woke up in the cold, empty loft above the workshop. He suffered every time his eyes landed on the faded photograph tacked to the wall. His wife, Sarah, her smile as bright as a summer sunflower, and their daughter, Emily, all missing front teeth and joyful innocence. They were gone, swallowed by a storm just like this one, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of hospital bills that had crushed his business, his home, and his soul into bankruptcy. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. The workshop, once a bustling hub of roaring engines and friendly banter, was now a mausoleum of half-finished projects and cold steel. His tools lay scattered, gathering dust like forgotten relics. A half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey was his only companion. He picked it up, the amber liquid sloshing mockingly. One more drink, and then maybe he'd find the courage to finally join them. The thought was a familiar, comforting poison. It was then that he heard it. Through the howl of the wind, another sound pierced the night, a high-pitched, metallic scream of tortured metal, followed by a concussive thud that vibrated through the concrete floor beneath his worn-out boots. It was a sound he knew too well, the sound of chaos, the sound of ending. For a moment, he did nothing. The world outside his frozen window could burn for all he cared. It had taken everything from him. He owed it nothing. Let the storm claim another victim. It was the way of things. But then an image flashed behind his eyes, vivid and cruel. Sarah's hand gripping the dashboard, Emily's favorite teddy bear flying through the fractured windshield. He saw the mangled steel, the shattered glass glistening like malevolent diamonds in the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. His own private hell replayed on a loop. A guttural cry escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony. He couldn't just sit here, not again, not while someone else's world might be ending out there in the white darkness. With a surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years, Jack kicked his chair back. He grabbed the heavy sheepskin-lined coat from a hook, the one Sarah had bought him for his birthday 5 years ago. It still smelled faintly of her. He pulled on his insulated boots, his movements frantic, clumsy. He snatched a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar from the workbench, his mechanic's instincts taking over. Stepping outside was like walking into a wall of razors. The wind tore the breath from his lungs and blasted his face with stinging pellets of ice. Visibility was less than 10 feet. The world was a churning vortex of white. He lowered his head and pushed forward, following the ghost of the sound down the treacherous, unpaved road that led from his isolated workshop to the main highway. Every step was a battle. The wind was a physical force trying to shove him back, to tell him to return to his tomb and let fate run its course. The memory of Sarah and Emily was a different kind of storm, roaring in his ears, threatening to buckle his knees. He walked for what felt like an eternity, his beard freezing to his face, his lungs burning. Then, his flashlight beam caught something. A dark shape, almost completely swallowed by a snowdrift, skewed at an impossible angle. It was a high-end black SUV, flipped onto its roof, its chassis twisted like a discarded soda can. Steam and a faint wisp of black smoke rose from the undercarriage, a dying breath in the frigid air. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled down the embankment, the snow up to his waist, his light cutting across the scene. The driver's side was crushed inward. Through the shattered window, he could see the driver, a man in a dark suit, slumped over the wheel, unmoving. There was no need to check for a pulse. Then he heard another sound, faint and terrified. A whimper. "Hello?" Jack yelled, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Is anyone else in there?" A small, choked sob answered him from the back seat. "Help! Please! Adrenaline surged through him like a lightning strike. He wedged the crowbar into the warped frame of the rear passenger door. The metal groaned in protest. He put his entire weight into it, his muscles screaming. With a final ear-splitting shriek, the door popped open. His light flooded the interior. The scene inside stole the air from his already burning lungs. There were two of them, two little girls, strapped into car seats, hanging upside down. The older one, maybe 7 or 8, had wide, terrified blue eyes and a cut on her forehead that was sluggishly bleeding. She was trying to unbuckle her sister, a smaller girl of about 5, who was pale and still, her eyes closed. "It's okay," Jack said, forcing a calmness into his voice that he did not feel. "I'm here to help you. What are your names?" The older girl hesitated, her eyes darting from Jack's grizzled face to the dead driver and back again. She was scared, but there was a fierce, protective glint in her gaze. "I'm Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's my sister, Maya. She won't wake up." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. She won't wake up. He fought back the wave of nausea and grief that threatened to drown him. "Okay, Lily, I'm gonna get you both out of here. We have to be quick." He carefully cut the straps of Lily's seatbelt with the knife from his pocket, catching her as she fell. She was light, but shivering uncontrollably. "I need you to be very brave for me, Lily," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm going to get your sister, and then we have to go. It's not safe here." He worked on Maya's buckles, his fingers numb and clumsy in the cold. She was limp in his arms, her breathing shallow. A small golden locket had fallen open on her chest. Inside, he caught a glimpse of an ornate stylized letter V. He didn't have time to think about it. He bundled the small child as best he could inside his own coat, cocooning her against his chest for warmth. "Hold on to me," he told Lily, helping her onto his back. "Hold on tight and don't let go, no matter what." With the unconscious Maya clutched to his chest and Lily clinging to his back like a tiny ghost, Jack Riley turned his face back into the teeth of the blizzard. He had 2 lives in his hands. The journey back was a Dantean struggle, a man who had lost everything fighting a godless storm for 2 children he didn't know. The weight was immense, both physical and spiritual. Each step was a prayer and a curse. He stumbled, fell to one knee, the weight of the girls almost pinning him down. For a second, he thought about giving up, about letting the snow take them all. It would be so easy. But then, he felt Maya stir faintly against his chest, a tiny, unconscious sigh. And on his back, he heard Lily whisper into the wind, "Please, mister. Please don't drop my sister." Something inside Jack Riley, something he thought had died 2 years ago on a frozen stretch of highway, flickered back to life. A stubborn, primal ember of defiance. He would not let the storm win, not again. With a roar that was lost in the wind's own scream, he pushed himself back to his feet and staggered onward, a broken man carrying the weight of a world he had forsaken, one agonizing step at a time, back toward the faint, welcoming light of his lonely workshop. He reached the door, fumbled with the handle, and fell inside, collapsing onto the cold floor in a heap of snow, exhaustion, and 2 very precious, very fragile lives. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, sealing them inside, a tiny island of warmth in an ocean of white fury. The world outside ceased to exist. Inside the workshop, the only sounds were the dying gasps of the blizzard against the metal walls, the crackle of a fledgling fire, and the ragged, shallow breaths of 3 survivors. For a long moment, Jack lay on the floor, the cold seeping through his coat, his body a single, screaming ache. The weight of the girls was gone, but a heavier weight settled in his chest. Responsibility. It was a feeling he thought he'd shed forever, a skin he'd been desperate to crawl out of. Now it was wrapped around him again, tight as a shroud. He pushed himself up, his joints protesting. The 2 girls were a huddled lump on the floor. Lily was trying to cover her unconscious sister with her own small body, a fierce, futile attempt at warmth. Her face, smudged with dirt and streaked with blood from the cut on her forehead, was set with a determination that broke Jack's heart. She looked so much like Emily in that moment, so fiercely protective of the thing she loved. Okay, Jack grunted, his voice rough. The word felt foreign. It was a word of action, of forward momentum, and he hadn't had any of that for a long time. First things first, let's get you warm. He moved with an economy of motion that came from years of working in this space. He dragged over a heavy canvas tarp, thick and smelling of oil and dust, and laid it on the floor. Then, he went to the loft, his private purgatory, and stripped the threadbare wool blankets from his own unmade bed. He didn't just bring the blankets, he grabbed the mattress too, a thin, lumpy thing, and heaved it over the railing. It landed with a soft whomp on the tarp below. He gently lifted the girls, one by one, onto the makeshift bed. Lily flinched at his touch but didn't resist. He could feel the violent tremors running through her small frame. Maya was terrifyingly still. He placed a calloused, grease-stained hand on her neck, his fingers searching for the delicate flutter of a pulse. He found it, weak but steady. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Next, the fire. The old potbelly stove in the corner hadn't been used in over a year, but it was his only source of real heat. He stuffed it with splintered bits of old pallets and a splash of lantern fuel to get it started. Within minutes, a greedy orange flame licked at the wood, and a wave of life-giving warmth began to push back against the workshop's oppressive chill. With the immediate danger of freezing averted, he turned his attention to their injuries. He found his old first aid kit, a metal box rusted at the hinges. "All right, Lily," he said, kneeling beside her. "Let's take a look at that cut." She shrank back, her blue eyes wide with distrust. "Don't touch me!" "I'm not gonna hurt you," Jack said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "I just need to clean it. We don't want it getting infected." He opened a sterile wipe, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. He showed her his empty hands, moving slowly, deliberately. "See? I'm just a mechanic. I fix things. Right now, I need to fix that cut." She watched him for a long moment, a silent negotiation taking place in her gaze. Finally, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound. He finished with a butterfly bandage, his large fingers clumsy but effective. "There," he said. "Good as new." He then turned to Maya. He checked her for injuries, his hands moving with practiced care over her small limbs. He found a nasty bruise forming on her side, but no signs of broken bones. Her stillness was the most worrying part. It was likely a concussion, but out here, with the storm raging, his workshop was the only hospital for miles. All he could do was keep her warm and wait. He settled back on his haunches, the firelight casting long dancing shadows across the cavernous space. The silence stretched, broken only by the storm. Are you one of the bad men?" Lily's voice was a small, wavering thing in the quiet. Jack looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Bad men? What are you talking about?" "The men who were chasing us," she said, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "The other car. They made our car crash. Mr. Henderson, he tried to fight them." A cold dread, far colder than the storm, snaked its way up Jack's spine. This wasn't just an accident. The dead driver. The story about another car. He looked at the two girls, huddled on his mattress. He saw the fine quality of their clothes, even torn and dirty. He remembered the ornate V on Maya's locket. These weren't just any kids. "He's dead, isn't he?" Lily whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Mr. Henderson, he's dead!" Jack could only nod, his throat suddenly tight. "I'm sorry." The tears spilled over, silent tracks on her dirty cheeks. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a father anymore. He'd forgotten how to comfort a child. Awkwardly, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he said, the words feeling like a vow. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Miles away, in a world of steel, glass, and silent, humming power, Alistair Vance stood before a wall of monitors. The view from his Manhattan penthouse was of the storm, but he didn't see the snow. He saw data streams, satellite imagery, and communication logs. The air in the room was cold, sterile, and controlled, the exact opposite of the chaos unfolding in Montana. Vance was a man forged in the crucible of code and corporate warfare. He didn't deal in emotions, he dealt in outcomes. His being sharp and handsome, was an unreadable mask of stone. But his eyes, a piercing shade of gray, burned with a cold fire. "Report," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't turn to face the man standing behind him. Marcus Kincaid, his head of security, a former Special Forces colonel, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, stepped forward. The transponder on the vehicle went offline at 1742 Mountain Time. Local authorities were alerted to a crash on Highway 89 an hour ago, but the blizzard is making access impossible. All roads are closed. We've lost contact with Henderson. "Henderson is dead," Vance stated. It wasn't a question. He would have activated his secondary beacon if he were alive. What about the threat assessment? "The chatter we've been monitoring from Petrov's network went silent 24 hours ago," Kincaid said. "The timing is too convenient. This has all the hallmarks of a professional snatch and grab. They forced the car off the road in the middle of an impassable storm. No witnesses. They take the assets and disappear. By the time the weather clears, they're long gone." "Assets," Vance repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He finally turned, and the full force of his icy gaze fell on Kincaid. "They are not assets, Marcus. They are my daughters. My daughters, who are now in the hands of kidnappers in the middle of a once-in-a-generation blizzard, because your impenetrable security protocols failed." Kincaid didn't flinch. "I'm rerouting the corporate jet to Great Falls. My tactical team is assembling. We'll be on the ground as soon as there's a window to land. I'm also putting pressure on the governor. I want the National Guard mobilized." "Not good enough," Vance snapped, turning back to the screens. A map of the crash area was displayed, a red dot marking the SUV's last known location. Whoever has them is either hunkered down waiting for the storm to pass, or they're trying to move on foot. They'll need shelter. Scan for any and all structures within a 5-mile radius of that crash site. Cabins, barns, workshops, outhouses. I want every single one identified. I want thermal satellite sweeps the second there's a break in the cloud cover, cross-reference property records. I want to know who owns every square inch of that frozen hellscape. And I want to know now. His fingers stabbed at the screen, landing on a small, isolated square of light that a junior analyst had just labeled. "What's that?" "Looks like a private residence or business, sir." The analyst's voice crackled over the speaker. "Registered to a Jack Riley, an auto repair shop. Looks like he lives on site. Address is remote." "Jack Riley," Vance said the name, tasting it. "Run him. I want to know everything. His credit score, his criminal record, his favorite brand of coffee. If he so much as jaywalked, I want to know about it." In a situation like this, there are no innocent bystanders. There are only accomplices. The order was given. The vast, global machinery of Alistair Vance's power began to turn, its gears grinding, its focus narrowing to a single point on a map. A forgotten workshop, where a broken man was coaxing a fire back to life. Back in Montana, the warmth of the stove was finally beginning to penetrate the small nest Jack had made. Maya stirred, her eyelids fluttering. She let out a soft moan. Lily gasped. "Maya." The little girl's eyes slowly opened. They were a deep, chocolate brown, clouded with confusion and pain. They darted around the strange, shadowy room, filled with the skeletons of cars and menacing tools hanging on the walls. Her gaze fell on Jack, his large, bearded silhouette looming over them. Her face crumpled, and she let out a piercing, terrified scream. Maya's scream was a shard of glass in the quiet workshop, raw and primal. It ripped through the fragile piece Jack had managed to build. Lily immediately threw herself over her sister, trying to muffle the sound, whispering frantic reassurances. "It's okay, Maya. Shh, it's okay. He's not one of them. He saved us." But Maya wasn't listening. Her small body was rigid with terror, her eyes locked on Jack. To her, waking up from a nightmare only to find herself in a dark, unfamiliar lair with a looming stranger, he was the monster. Jack felt a pang in his chest so sharp it was like a physical wound. He saw the fear in her eyes, and it transported him back 2 years to the hospital waiting room. He remembered the look on the doctor's face, that same mix of pity and professional distance. He was the harbinger of bad news, the scary figure associated with trauma. He instinctively took a step back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Hey, it's all right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm not going to hurt you. You were in an accident. I brought you here to get out of the storm." His retreat seemed to calm her slightly. Her screams subsided into hiccuping sobs, her small hands clutching Lily's arm like a lifeline. Jack knew better than to press closer. He needed to make himself smaller, less threatening. He sank down onto the cold concrete, leaning his back against the tire of a half-dismantled Ford pickup, putting a safe distance between them. He stayed there, a silent guardian, letting Lily work her quiet magic. "See?" Lily whispered to her sister. "He's staying over there. He made us a warm bed and he put a bandage on my head. He's nice." Slowly, Maya's sobs quieted. Her gaze flickered from Jack to the comforting glow of the potbelly stove, to the blankets wrapped around her. The immediate terror began to recede, replaced by a weary confusion. Jack saw his opening. "Are you hungry?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "I don't have much, but I think I've got some soup." It was a long shot. The cupboards in his small loft kitchen were a testament to his neglect. But he remembered a few cans of chicken noodle soup Sarah had bought for a winter that she never got to see. He found them behind a box of stale crackers, their labels faded. It was sustenance, plain and simple. He heated the soup on a small hot plate, the smell filling the workshop. It wasn't a gourmet meal, but it was warm and real. He poured it into 2 chipped ceramic mugs, the only clean dishes he could find. He set them on the edge of the mattress, then retreated back to his spot by the truck. He didn't want to crowd them. Lily eyed the mugs cautiously, then picked one up. She blew on the steaming liquid before taking a tentative sip. Her eyes widened slightly. She nudged the other mug toward Maya. "Try it," she urged. "It's good." Maya, still wary, allowed her sister to help her sit up and hold the mug. She drank, the warmth spreading through her, chasing away some of the lingering chill. For the first time since she'd woken up, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. They ate in silence, the only sound the slurping of soup and the ceaseless moan of the wind outside. Jack watched them, a strange mix of emotions churning inside him. The simple act of caring for someone, of providing warmth and food, was achingly familiar. It was a muscle he hadn't used in 2 years, and it was sore, but not entirely broken. He was a mechanic, a fixer, and right now, these 2 small, broken lives were the most important engine he'd ever tried to mend. When they were finished, Lily placed the empty mugs neatly to the side. "Thank you," she said, her voice formal and polite, a clear echo of a well-mannered upbringing. Maya just stared at him, her brown eyes big and assessing. "You're welcome," Jack replied. He needed to know more, to understand what he had stumbled into. "Lily, you said there were other men in another car. What did they look like?" Lily frowned, trying to remember. "It was all snowy. Their car was big and black, like ours. It hit us. Mr. Henderson yelled. He had his gun." Jack's blood ran cold. Gun. This was far more than a simple car chase. Mr. Henderson had a gun? "He always has one," Lily said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "For protection. Daddy says we're very important." An uncomfortable truth began to dawn on Jack. The expensive SUV, the bodyguard with a gun, the violent attack in the storm. "Who is your daddy, Lily?" he asked gently. Lily hesitated, a flicker of ingrained caution in her eyes. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "I know," Jack said. "And you're right not to, but I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm the guy who pulled you out of the snow. Right now, out there." He gestured to the door. "It's dangerous. The more I know, the better I can keep you both safe." Lily looked at Maya, who gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. Lily took a deep breath. "Our daddy is Alistair Vance." The name meant nothing to Jack. He'd been disconnected from the world for 2 years. News, politics, the stock market. It was all just noise from a life he no longer lived. "I'm afraid I don't know who that is." It was Lily's turn to look surprised. "Everyone knows my daddy," she said, a touch of childish pride in her voice. He owns Vance Industries. He makes computers and phones and everything. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. A tech billionaire. That explained everything, and it meant that the men who had run them off the road weren't just random thugs. They were professionals, and they had failed. They hadn't gotten the girls, which meant they were probably still out there, in the storm, looking for them. A new, urgent fear gripped him. His isolated workshop, once his sanctuary from the world, had suddenly become a prison and a target. He stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Don't move from that mattress and don't make a sound." He went to the main workshop door, the big roll-up garage door, and inspected the heavy-duty lock. It was solid. He dragged a heavy engine block in front of it for good measure. He did the same with the small side door he'd stumbled through earlier, ramming the crowbar through the handles. He was barricading them in. He moved to the windows, his grimy portholes to the outside world. He couldn't see anything but a swirling abyss of white. But that didn't mean no one could see him. His lights were on. From the outside, his workshop would be a beacon in the storm. He killed the main overhead lights, plunging the large space into a deep gloom, illuminated only by the hungry orange glow of the stove. The shadows grew longer, more menacing. The skeletons of the cars around them looked like slumbering beasts. He could feel the girls' eyes on him, their fear ratcheting up again with his sudden, tense actions. He had to reassure them, but he couldn't lie. "The men who chased you," he said, his back still to them as he scanned the darkness outside a window. "They might still be out there. We need to be quiet, and we need to stay out of sight." He turned back to face them. In the flickering firelight, he probably looked like the monster Maya had first imagined. But he didn't care. He was no longer just a grieving drunk hiding from his past. He was a protector. He was the only thing standing between these two children and the wolves circling in the snow. And as if on cue, a sound cut through the wind's howl. It was faint, but unmistakable. The strained, grinding roar of an engine, fighting its way through the deep snow. It was close, and it was getting closer. Jack grabbed the heaviest tire iron from his workbench. The cold steel felt solid, real, in his trembling hands. He moved to the side of the main door, pressing himself into the shadows. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of the storm. "Get down!" he whispered to the girls, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "And don't make a sound." The engine sound grew louder, then sputtered and died, followed by the slam of a car door. Muffled voices shouted over the wind. They were right outside. The silence that followed the engine's death was more terrifying than the noise. It was a loaded silence, filled with the unheard crunch of boots in the snow and the hiss of determined breathing. Jack's knuckles were white where he gripped the tire iron. Every nerve ending was on fire. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a cornered animal, instinct screaming at him from a place deeper than memory. He risked a glance toward the girls. They had done exactly as he'd said, flattening themselves onto the mattress behind the partial cover of a rusty Chevrolet chassis. In the dim, hellish glow of the stove, he could see Lily's wide, terrified eyes fixed on him. She had a hand clamped over Maya's mouth, a silent, desperate plea for quiet. He gave her a single, sharp nod. "Stay down." Muffled thumps sounded against the main roll-up door. They were testing it, seeing if it would give. "It's locked up tight," a voice shouted, barely audible through the steel and the storm. The accent was thick, Eastern European. "He must have gone in through the side." Footsteps crunched around the building. Jack's heart leaped into his throat as they approached the smaller side door, the very door he'd fallen through. The door he had barricaded with the crowbar. A heavy fist hammered against it. "Hello, anyone in there?" The voice was closer now, laced with a false, syrupy friendliness. "We had an accident. We saw your lights. We need help." Jack's breath hitched. It was a classic predator's gambit. Lure the prey out with a story of distress. He remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow and adrenaline. The tire iron felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He wasn't a fighter. The last time he'd been in a real fight was in high school, over a girl he couldn't even remember the name of now. The knocking stopped. A moment of tense silence, then, "I know you're in there. I can see the smoke from your stove." A violent kick rattled the door in its frame. The crowbar held. Another kick, harder this time, splintering the wood around the lock. Jack pressed himself flatter against the wall. His muscles coiled like springs. He could hear them now, two of them at least, breathing heavily with exertion. "Forget this," the first voice grunted. "Dimitri, get the bolt cutters from the truck." Bolt cutters. Jack's mind raced. The heavy chain and padlock on the main door wouldn't stand a chance. They would be inside in minutes. His eyes darted around the workshop, his brain cataloging his environment not as a mechanic, but as a soldier defending a fortress. Piles of tires, barrels of flammable engine degreaser, tangled nests of heavy chains and cables, shelves stacked with heavy solid steel parts. His workshop was no longer a tomb. It was an armory. He couldn't wait for them to breach. He had to act first. He had to change the terms of the engagement. With silent, cat-like steps, he moved away from the door toward the center of the workshop. He pointed at a stack of old, bald tires piled high in a dark corner, then pointed to the girls, his meaning clear. "Hide." Lily, understanding instantly, nudged her sister, and they scurried from the mattress, squeezing themselves into the narrow, dark gap behind the tires. They were almost completely invisible. Now, for the welcome party, he grabbed a canister of brake cleaner, highly flammable and aerosolized. Then he found what he was looking for, a discarded car battery and a set of jumper cables. He worked quickly, his hands sure and steady, his mind a calm oasis in a storm of fear. He stripped a section of insulation from the end of one cable, exposing the copper wire. He clamped the other end to the battery's positive terminal. Outside, he heard the metallic snap and groan of the bolt cutters biting into the hardened steel of the padlock. Time was up. He moved to the main roll-up door. Taped to the inside was a small, grimy mirror he used for checking his own reflection before heading home. Back when he had a home to go to. It gave him a perfect, distorted view of the side door across the workshop. Crack. The chain on the main door gave way with a loud clang. The heavy door began to groan as two men started to heave it upwards from the outside, just enough to create a gap at the bottom. Jack held his breath. A pair of muddy boots slid under the door, followed by a pair of legs. A man, built like a refrigerator and dressed in black tactical gear, shimmied under, grunting with the effort. He held a pistol with a silencer, sweeping it methodically across the darkened workshop. His eyes hadn't adjusted to the gloom yet. A second man started to follow him under the door. This was his only chance. Jack pressed the button on the canister of brake cleaner, aiming a long concentrated spray at the side door's frozen lock mechanism. He emptied half the can, the potent chemical smell filling the air. Then he took the jumper cable connected to the battery. He reached out and touched the exposed copper wire to the metal handle of the crowbar barricading the door. A brilliant blue-white spark leaped across the gap with a loud crackle. The cloud of aerosolized brake cleaner ignited. Whoomph! A fireball erupted from the side door, a sudden, violent exhalation of heat and light. It blew the door off its hinges and sent the man standing outside it staggering back, screaming, his clothes on fire. Inside, the first man, who was now halfway to his feet, spun around in shock, momentarily blinded by the flash. In that split second of confusion, Jack moved. He didn't charge. He didn't yell. He lunged from the darkness like a panther, swinging the heavy tire iron in a low, brutal arc. It connected with the man's knee with a sickening wet crunch. The man screamed, a high, shrill sound of pure agony, and dropped his gun as his leg folded under him. The pistol skittered across the concrete floor, coming to a stop near the glowing stove. Jack didn't hesitate. He brought the tire iron up and slammed it down on the man's wrist as he reached for the weapon. Bones snapped. The man collapsed, howling, clutching his ruined leg and shattered hand. The battle wasn't over. The second man, the one who'd been set on fire, had managed to smother the flames by rolling in the snow. He was now staggering to his feet, enraged, pulling his own weapon. He was framed in the ruined doorway, a terrifying silhouette against the swirling white of the blizzard. Jack was exposed in the middle of the floor, his only weapon a tire iron. The man raised his pistol, Time seemed to slow down. Jack saw the dark hole of the barrel, a perfect circle of impending death. This was it. This was how it ended. The thought was strangely calm. At least he hadn't died alone in the dark. Then something small and dark flew through the air from the direction of the stove. It struck the gunman in the face with a dull thud. It was one of the empty ceramic soup mugs. The man grunted in surprise, his aim thrown off for a fraction of a second. But a fraction was all Jack needed. He dove behind the Chevy chassis, the silenced of the pistol sending chips of concrete flying past his head. Jack peered from behind his cover. The gunman was advancing into the workshop, his eyes scanning the shadows, his weapon held at the ready. His partner was on the floor, moaning, trying to crawl away. Jack knew he couldn't win a direct fight. He had to use the workshop. He had to make the arena his own. His eyes fell on the heavy engine hoist in the corner, a dangling chain and hook hanging from its steel arm like a hangman's noose. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. He scrambled away, deeper into the labyrinth of machinery, making just enough noise to draw the gunman after him. "Come out, you American dog!" the man snarled, his accent thicker with rage. "You can't hide forever!" He followed Jack into the darkest part of the workshop, away from the firelight. Jack slipped behind the engine hoist, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He grabbed the heavy hook. The gunman rounded the corner, his pistol leading the way. With every ounce of strength he possessed, Jack swung the heavy chain. The hook, a solid block of forged steel, flew through the air like a medieval mace on a chain. It caught the gunman squarely in the side of the head with a sickening thwack. The man's eyes rolled back in his head. He dropped his gun and collapsed to the floor like a sack of rocks, completely silent. The workshop fell quiet once more. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the howl of the wind, and the pathetic, pain-filled moans of the first man. Jack stood over the unconscious form of his attacker, his chest heaving, the tire iron still gripped in one hand, the engine hoist chain in the other. He was covered in grease and sweat, his face a mask of grim fury. The quiet, broken man was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone harder, someone who had just stared into the abyss and refused to blink. He walked over to the first man, who was now weeping in a mixture of Russian and broken English. Jack kicked the gun away from him and stood over him, his shadow falling across the man's terrified face. "Who sent you?" Jack's voice was a low, gravelly growl he didn't recognize as his own. The man just shook his head, babbling, "Please, my leg." Jack pressed the cold, heavy steel of the tire iron against the man's throat. "I will not ask again. Who sent you?" The man's eyes were wide with terror. He saw no mercy in Jack's face, only a cold, chilling finality. "Petrov," he choked out. "Anatoly Petrov. He wants the girls. Leverage against Vance. Please." Jack stared down at him for a long moment. Then he straightened up, pulling the tire iron away. He had what he needed. He wasn't a killer, not yet anyway. He found some zip ties and efficiently bound the conscious man's hands and feet. He did the same to the unconscious one. He stood up, surveying the scene. 2 professional kidnappers, neutralized. 1 door blown off its hinges. A blizzard still raging outside. And 2 little girls hiding behind a stack of tires. He walked over to them, his legs unsteady. He knelt down. "It's okay," he said, his voice returning to its normal, softer tone. "It's over. You can come out now." Lily peered out from behind the tires, her face pale, her eyes enormous. She looked at the bound men, then back at Jack. She wasn't looking at a monster anymore. She was looking at a hero. She crawled out, pulling Maya with her. She didn't say a word. She just walked up to Jack, wrapped her small arms around his waist, and held on as if she would never let go. Jack froze, the tire iron falling from his numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. He stood there for a second, stiff and awkward, before his own arms came up and tentatively wrapped around her small, trembling body. It was the first time he had held someone in 2 years. And in the middle of the carnage and the cold, something inside him, something he thought was frozen solid, began to thaw. The hug lasted for a long, quiet moment. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of the last hour. For Lily, it was the safety of a harbor after a terrifying storm. For Jack, it was like feeling a phantom limb suddenly ache with life. He could feel her small heart beating against his ribs, a fragile, frantic rhythm that was a stark contrast to the dead stillness he had carried inside himself for so long. He gently disentangled himself, kneeling to be at her eye level. "You were very brave," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Throwing that mug, that was quick thinking. You saved my life." Lily just nodded, her eyes still wide, taking in the aftermath. Maya peeked out from behind her sister's legs, her thumb securely in her mouth, her gaze fixed on the two men now lying hog-tied and silent on the floor. The immediate threat was gone, but the fear lingered in the air, a metallic taste like old blood. Jack knew they couldn't stay in the main workshop. The blown-out door was a gaping wound, letting in the cold and exposing them to the world. And who knew if Petrov had only sent one team? The thought sent a fresh chill down his spine. They had to move. They had to disappear within his own sanctuary. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're going upstairs, to my place. It's warmer and it's safer." He didn't wait for an answer. He went to the two bound men. The conscious one, his legs swelling to a grotesque size, glared at him with pure hatred. Jack ignored him. Using his mechanic's knowledge of knots, he made sure their restraints were secure, then dragged them, one by one, into a small cold storage closet used for housing old engine parts. He shut the heavy metal door and slid the thick iron bolt across. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy him time. He collected their pistols, the cold, efficient weight of them feeling alien and profane in his hands. He'd never fired a gun in his life. He tucked them into the waistband of his jeans, the metal cold against his skin. Then he turned his attention back to the girls. "Grab the blankets," he instructed. "Bring everything. We're setting up camp." He led them to a narrow, steep staircase in the corner of the workshop, a structure he had built himself years ago. It led up to the loft, his private living space. As they climbed, they left the cold, shadowy world of steel and oil below and entered a space that was, in its own way, just as bleak. The loft was one large, open room under a slanted roof. A mattress lay on the floor in one corner, a rumpled mess of sheets. A small kitchenette with dirty dishes in the sink occupied another. Clothes were strewn over a single armchair. It wasn't a home, it was a den, the place where a wounded animal had crawled to lick its wounds in solitude. The air was stale with neglect and loneliness. The only personal touch was the photograph of Sarah and Emily, their smiling faces a silent, heartbreaking accusation. Lily and Maya stood in the middle of the room, looking small and out of place amidst his squalor. Jack felt a sudden, sharp pang of shame. He saw the space through their eyes, not as his refuge, but as a dirty, sad room belonging to a broken man. "It's not much," he mumbled, running a hand through his matted hair. "But the windows are small, and there's only one way up." He set about making the space defensible. He dragged a heavy wooden workbench from against a wall and wedged it against the door at the top of the stairs. It wouldn't stop a determined attacker, but it would make noise and slow them down. He checked the small, high windows. They were frosted over, impossible to see through from the outside. Good. He took the blankets from Lily and recreated the nest they'd had downstairs, placing it in the corner furthest from the door, partially shielded by the armchair. As he worked, Maya, who had been silent since the fight, finally spoke. "Are you going to die?" she asked, her voice small and clear. Jack stopped, turning to look at her. "What?" "Mr. Henderson died," she stated, her logic simple and childishly brutal. "He tried to fight the bad men, and they killed him. You fought the bad men, so are you going to die now?" The question hung in the air, stripped of all adult pretense. It wasn't morbid, it was a genuine inquiry from a child trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become violent and unpredictable. Jack sat down on the floor in front of her. He looked into her big, serious brown eyes. "No," he said, with a certainty that surprised even himself. "I'm not going to die, and neither are you. My job is to fix things that are broken, and right now, my job is to make sure you two stay fixed, okay?" She seemed to consider this for a moment. Then she gave a slow, solemn nod. A fragile truce settled over the small loft. The storm continued its assault outside, but up here, insulated by the chaos below, it felt distant. For the first time in 2 years, Jack wasn't entirely alone with his ghosts. The presence of the two girls filled the space, changing its very atmosphere. He found some bottled water and a box of granola bars he'd forgotten about. They shared them in silence, a strange makeshift family having a picnic in a besieged fortress. He tried to keep them distracted, asking Lily about school and Maya about her favorite color. He learned that Lily was brilliant at math and that Maya loved drawing unicorns. He told them about the different cars he'd worked on, explaining how an engine worked in the simplest terms. He was trying to build a small bubble of normalcy around them, a fragile shield against the horror that lay waiting just a few feet below and miles beyond. As the hours bled into one another, exhaustion began to set in. Maya's eyelids started to droop, and she finally curled up in the nest of blankets, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. Lily tried to fight it, her eyes constantly darting toward the door, her body tense. "You should get some sleep," Jack told her gently. "I'll keep watch." "You promise?" she whispered. "You won't fall asleep?" "I promise," he said, and he meant it. He felt as if he might never sleep again. She finally relented, lying down beside her sister, but not before positioning herself so she could still see Jack. He settled into the lumpy armchair, one of the captured pistols resting on his lap. It felt cold and heavy, a terrible promise. He watched the two girls sleep, their chests rising and falling in the faint light from the small window. He looked from their peaceful faces to the smiling faces in the photograph on his wall. Sarah, Emily, Lily, Maya. The names swirled together in his head, the past and the present colliding in the small, dusty room. He was failing his own family. He had let them die. He would not fail these girls. It was a penance, a purpose. Alistair Vance's private Gulfstream jet cut through the upper atmosphere, flying above the storm that held his daughters captive. Below him, his world was in turmoil, but inside the whisper-quiet cabin, there was only cold, calculated focus. The analyst's report on Jack Riley was displayed on the tablet in his hands. Subject, Jack T. Riley, age 42. Occupation, mechanic, self-employed. Financial status, bankrupt. Filed for Chapter 7 following foreclosure on his primary residence. Business is heavily in debt. Marital status, widower. Wife, Sarah Riley, and daughter, Emily Riley, age 6, deceased. Single vehicle accident, winter storm, 2 years prior. No criminal record, minor traffic violations only. Vance read the file again. A widower, lost his own daughter in a storm. Bankrupt, desperate. To a man like Vance, who saw the world as a series of calculated risks and predictable human behaviors, the profile was damning. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man of all. He's unpredictable, and he's cheap to buy. Petrov could have gotten to him, Vance mused aloud, his voice flat. Offered him a payout to snatch the girls. A local asset. Knows the terrain. It fits. It's a plausible theory, sir. Marcus Kincaid agreed, sitting opposite him. But it's just a theory. He could also be exactly what he appears to be, a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't believe in coincidences, Marcus, Vance said, his gray eyes like chips of ice. Not when my children are involved. When we get to that workshop, we treat Riley as hostile. We assume he is the enemy until proven otherwise. I want your team ready to breach on my command. Non-lethal force, if possible. But I want my daughters back. That is the only objective. Is that understood? Understood, sir, Kincaid said, his face grim. The jet began its descent, banking toward the private airfield outside Great Falls, that Vance's influence had forced open. Below, the storm was beginning to show the first subtle signs of breaking. The worst was over. For Vance, the fight was just beginning. He was bringing the full, crushing weight of his power and wealth to bear on one small, isolated workshop in the middle of nowhere. He was coming for his daughters, and God help the bankrupt mechanic who stood in his way. Dawn arrived not as a sunrise, but as a subtle shift in the quality of darkness. The oppressive, inky black of the blizzard's heart slowly diluted into a bruised, monochromatic gray. The wind, which had screamed all night like a banshee, quieted to a low, mournful moan. The storm was breaking. Jack hadn't slept. He sat in the armchair, a sentinel in the gloom, watching the girls and listening. He listened to their soft breathing, a sound that had become more precious to him than his own. He listened to the groan of the workshop settling under the immense weight of the snow, and he listened for the sound of another engine. The silence from the closet below was unsettling. Were the men unconscious, or were they just waiting? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He must have drifted for a moment, his head lolling to the side because a small sound jolted him awake. It was Lily, sitting up in the nest of blankets, her eyes on him. "You're still awake," she whispered. A statement of fact, not a question. "I promised," he whispered back. She crawled out of the blankets, careful not to wake her sister, and came over to his chair. She pointed to the photograph on the wall, the one he both cherished and couldn't bear to look at. "Is that your little girl?" she asked. Jack's throat tightened. He could only nod. "She's pretty," Lily said simply. "What was her name?" "Emily," Jack managed to say, the name a rusty key turning in a lock he thought had been sealed forever. Her name was Emily. What happened to her? He should have shut the conversation down. It was his pain, his private hell, but looking at Lily, at her innocent, inquisitive face, he found he couldn't. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the shared trauma of the last 12 hours. Or maybe, for the first time in 2 years, he didn't want to be alone with his grief. "There was a storm," he began, his voice raspy. "Like this one. Lots of snow, black ice on the road. I wasn't with them. I was here, working late on a rush job, trying to make a few extra bucks." The bitterness in his own voice surprised him. A few extra bucks? What a joke. "They were coming to bring me dinner. Sarah, my wife, she hated me working so late." He trailed off, the memory a vivid, searing film playing behind his eyes. The phone call, the drive to the hospital, his truck skidding on the same ice, the sterile white room. "It's my fault," he said, the words he had never spoken aloud before, the words that had been poisoning him from the inside out. "I should have been there. I should have told them to stay home." Lily was quiet for a long moment. He expected her to say something comforting, something a child would say, like, "It wasn't your fault." But she didn't. Instead, she reached out her small hand and placed it on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. "My mommy died too," she said, her voice steady. "She got sick. The doctors tried to fix her, but they couldn't. Daddy says it wasn't anyone's fault. He says sometimes things just break." Jack stared at her, at this little girl who had lost so much herself, offering him not pity, but a profound shared understanding. Sometimes things just break. It was the simplest, most honest piece of wisdom he had ever heard. It was a mechanic's wisdom. And in that moment, a tiny fissure appeared in the wall of guilt he had built around his heart. A sudden, loud bang from downstairs shattered the moment. It was the sound of the closet door being kicked from the inside. They were awake, and they were trying to get out. Jack was on his feet instantly, the pistol back in his hand. He pushed Lily behind him. "Stay here," he ordered. "Get back in the corner and don't move." Another bang, louder this time, followed by the screech of stress metal. The bolt on the closet door wouldn't hold for long. He had to end this. But how? He couldn't risk a gunfight inside the workshop, not with the risk of a stray bullet. He had to get them out of the building. His eyes scanned the loft. There had to be another way out. His gaze fell on a large, double-paned window at the back of the loft, overlooking the dense forest behind his property. It was a steep drop, at least 15 feet, into a massive snowdrift. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It was their only option. "Change of plans," he said, moving with frantic purpose. "We're going out the back." He used the tire iron to break the seal on the window, which had been frozen shut for years. It finally gave way with a groan. A blast of frigid, clean air filled the stale loft. He looked down. The snow was deep, soft. It would be a rough landing, but it was survivable. Another crash from below, followed by the splintering of wood. The closet door was failing. "Okay, listen to me," he said, turning to the girls. "I'm gonna lower you down, one at a time. Lily, you first. You have to land and get out of the way immediately. Can you do that?" She nodded, her face pale but determined. He ripped a sheet from his mattress, quickly braiding it into a makeshift rope. He tied it around her waist. As he was about to lift her, Maya started to cry, a panicked, sleepy whimper. "Don't leave me!" "I'm not leaving you," Lily said, her voice brave and strong for her sister. "He's gonna lower me down, then I'll catch you, I promise." Jack didn't have time to marvel at her courage. He could hear the men shouting below. The main bolt on the closet door snapped with a loud crack. They were out. He lifted Lily through the window. "Hang on tight!" he yelled and began lowering her down. She was light and the drop was quick. She landed in the snowdrift with a soft poof, disappearing for a second before her head popped back up. She scrambled out of the way, just as he'd told her. He pulled the sheet back up. He could hear the men at the bottom of the loft stairs now, testing the workbench he'd used as a barricade. It wouldn't hold them for long. He tied the sheet around a whimpering Maya. "It's okay," he soothed. "You're just going for a little ride. Lily is waiting for you." He lifted her and lowered her down. Lily was there, her arms outstretched, helping her sister land safely. The workbench at the door splintered. Heavy footsteps started pounding up the stairs. Jack looked at the drop. There was no time to make a rope for himself. He took the 2 pistols from his waistband. He couldn't leave them here. He tucked them securely in his coat. He took one last look at the photograph of his wife and daughter. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he turned, took a running start, and leaped out of the window. He hit the snowdrift hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body. For a second, the world went white and silent. He came up sputtering, gasping for air, snow packed into his mouth and eyes. The girls were there, pulling at his arm. "Come on," Lily yelled. "We have to run." He got to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He grabbed each of them by the hand. "This way," he commanded, and plunged into the forest. The snow was deep, up to his thighs, making every step an exhausting effort. The trees provided some cover, but they wouldn't hide them for long. Behind them, he heard a window shatter upstairs as one of the men fired a shot after them. The bullet whizzed past his ear and buried itself in a pine tree. They were being hunted. Alistair Vance's convoy of black heavy-duty trucks, retrofitted with snow tracks, roared down the newly plowed highway. They looked less like civilian vehicles and more like an armored column preparing for an invasion. Inside the lead vehicle, Vance watched a live drone feed on a tablet. The drone, launched from a nearby clearing, was now circling high above Jack Riley's workshop. "Thermal shows 3 heat signatures inside the main building," the drone operator reported over the comms. "2 small, 2... Wait, I'm getting 2 more, larger. They're moving. All signatures are now on the 2nd floor." Vance's knuckles were white on the tablet. "Petrov's men are inside with them," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "They have my daughters." "We're 5 minutes out, sir," Kincaid said, checking the action on his assault rifle. "Something's happening," the operator said. "One of the signatures. It just exited the rear of the building. From the 2nd story. Wait, 2 more. The small ones. They're out. They're moving into the woods." Vance's heart stopped. He zoomed in the thermal image. He could see them. A large figure and 2 small ones. Fleeing. "That's them," he breathed. "That has to be them. Riley is getting them out." For the first time, a sliver of doubt entered Vance's mind. If Riley was the kidnapper, why would he be running from the other men? 2 more signatures exiting the rear window, the operator continued. "They're in pursuit. We have a foot chase." "Get us there now," Vance roared at the driver. "And get that drone lower. I want eyes on my girls." The convoy sped up, snow flying from their tracks. On the screen, Vance watched a terrifying drama unfold in shades of orange and red. The larger friendly signature, Riley, was breaking a trail through the deep snow, pulling the smaller signatures along. The 2 hostile signatures were closing the distance. They were faster, unencumbered. It was a race against time, a race between a desperate mechanic and 2 professional killers, a race between a father's high-tech rescue mission and the brutal, low-tech reality of survival in the frozen wilderness. And Alistair Vance, the man who controlled empires from his penthouse, could do nothing but watch.